My name is Saara Kamppari-Miller. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm an Inclusive DesignOps Program Manager at the Intel Accessibility Office. But before we jump in, I have to give you a confession. I'm standing before you today, low-key terrified. You see, I represent this huge company, Intel. We make chips that go into computers that impact the lives of billions of people around the globe. And I'm going to be telling you that our inclusive design and research adoption score amongst user experience teams at Intel is 21%. Now, this makes me feel a little bit like an imposter. What am I doing at AxCon telling you about how to operationalize inclusive design when we are only at 21%? But I have to ask, do you know your score? Often companies will say things like, we value inclusion, or we're all in on accessibility. We might put out goals about how we want to make all our products accessible, but the people on the ground doing the work, we can see that we're not putting out inaccessible products. We're not meeting our goals. It feels like hypocrisy to be saying one thing and doing another. We have a goal-reality mismatch. The reality of how we're actually doing things and the vision of where we want to be. Well, if this mismatch is resonating with you, well, you're at the right talk. This talk is about intentionality. When we state our goals and where we want to be, we need to be more intentional about how we reach that goal and really live up to our stated values. And this talk is not about you. This is not about the individual designers and researchers and saying, you have to do better. Here's a checklist of all the things you have to do. I will say that, yes, we do need more accessibility designers, but we also don't want to burn out all our accessibility designers by putting this all on them. Reference yesterday's accessibility burnout talk by Shell Little. What this talk is about is organizations and how we need to build all the support structures to help our designers and researchers do their jobs better. And this talk is about progress. We need to be measuring how we're doing along that journey to our goal of full accessibility or full inclusion, and to know when things are not working so we can make changes to do better. And this talk will provide a playbook for how to start operationalizing inclusive design. But before we break open that playbook, I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about design operations and its cousin, research operations, or as they're often shortened to, design ops and research ops. These are fairly new fields. They're still emerging and more people are becoming ops professionals every year. For simplicity in this talk, I'm going to be referring to design ops, but I really mean both design ops and research ops. I learned about design operations about 4 years ago, interestingly around the same time that I learned about inclusive design, but I didn't combine those together until later. Design operations and research operations are both about being intentional. As designers, we have our ways of doing things. We know we have processes, but as teams, as organizations, are we being intentional together about how we work? Design operations is all about being that intentional party here saying, hey, let's look at how we're really working and let's improve how we work together. And let's take that burden off of our individual designers and researchers such that they can focus on designing and researching. And we ops, we focus on the processes, the governance, the tooling that we need to support you in your job. So I often talk about design ops as being improving how we work. And if you know inclusive design, that's often described as a process for how we work in order to make products that are more inclusive. So for me, I look at these two terms back and forth really quickly. They seem very similar. We need design ops to help implement inclusive design. I truly believe that operations can help accelerate your shift left for accessibility, and that you should be partnering with your operations folks in order to make this happen. But what if your company doesn't have a design operations function? Well, congratulations. You are now in charge of inclusive design operations. Often before a company has a formal design ops function, there are individuals who are more ops minded who start putting on some of this work. And that person might be you. The good news is I have a playbook for you. This is the playbook for how to start operationalizing inclusive design. There are 7 plays inside of this playbook. The first play is to become a change agent. The second play is to identify your agency, authority, and autonomy. The third play is to conduct a listening tour. The fourth play is to use a framework. The fifth play is to make a goal. The sixth play is to pick one thing to move teams forward. The seventh play is to track progress. And the eighth is to repeat. So let's open up that first play. Become a change agent. More specifically, you are a change agent. A change agent is a person who wants to make a change in the world around them. That's why you're attending this talk, right? You want to help make progress in the practice of inclusive design at your work. The change agent motto is, I will do what I can with what I have where I am. This is by April Mills, the author of Everyone is a Change Agent. Now, when you think about operations, you'll think about things like processes, tooling, infrastructure, governance, and these might sound a little dry or robotic. But actually, the work of design operations is very human. We often talk about human glue, meaning we're doing the work that helps connect people together and helps us collaborate better together. And this is the same for change agents too. Another thing that glue does is that glue makes connections. And you're going to need to make a lot of connections to be effective in operationalizing inclusive design. This is not only with your design teams, but also with other partners, such as your diversity and inclusion programs, and anywhere else where accessibility is being operationalized. And not only will you need to connect people together, you'll also need to help connect people to the work. Because unfortunately, often the work does not speak for itself. You are going to need to help people make the connections to that work and make communities out of these connections with people and the work. The good news is you don't have to do this alone. So repeat after me. I give you permission to be a change agent. You can create more change agents just by giving other people the permission to also be one. Sometimes people are hesitant to do something because they feel like they're not allowed to. But a change agent at any time is allowed to designate another person as a change agent. So go forth and make more change agents to work together. The next play from the playbook is to identify your agency, authority, and autonomy. And you might have noticed that I just used my authority as a speaker at this conference to give you the authority to be a change agent. So that's something that's really interesting here, is that we can help each other with our agency, authority, and autonomy. So keep that in mind as we go through this play. The 3 A's framework is by Bridget Meltzler. She's a research operations professional, and I'll provide the resources to learn more about this framework at the end of the talk. And to best work as design operations, as a change agent, we really need to understand our 3 A's. The first A, agency, is all about, can you take action? Can you actually do something? Or is it somebody else who you need to influence who can actually do something about it? Our autonomy, are you the one making decisions, or is there somebody else who's the decision maker who, again, you need to be able to influence their decision making? And finally, our authority. Authority is often granted from someone else, from above high. For example, a job title will give you the authority to do things. But authority can also be granted to you by your peers. So do your peers recognize you as a subject matter expert in this area or not? You can think about these 3, agency, autonomy, and authority, as a Venn diagram. And you want to understand, what is your current Venn diagram? And what happens if you don't have one of these things? For example, let's say you don't have any authority. So you have the agency to do something, you have the autonomy to make decisions, but nobody recognizes you as the authority figure on this topic. Well, you'll do a lot of work on your own, but you won't get much done beyond that. In another example, you might have no agency. So you can make decisions, you are the authority figure, but you are not the one doing the work. You can't actually make anything happen on your own. And this might resonate with some folks who work in accessibility. You're often asking other people to do something to change the way they work, but you cannot force them to do that. Or you might be in a situation where you don't have the autonomy. So you have the agency where you can do things, you have the authority. Someone said that, oh yeah, they're the subject matter expert, but you're not the one making the decision, for example, to deprioritize a project. So when thinking about what is your current set of 3As, another thing I want you to think about is the difference between the 3As of somebody who is practicing inclusive design and the 3As of someone who's operationalizing inclusive design. Because you're actually going to be working on different things and have different types of agency, authority, and autonomy. And I think the great thing about being in a role where you're operationalizing is that you're actually actively trying to increase the agency of somebody who is practicing, and not only their agency, but also their authority and their autonomy, such that they can do more in their role. And it's also reciprocal, because when they start seeing you as that peer who is operationalizing this, they help increase your own authority and agency to do more in an operations role. So when you're trying to figure out your 3As, you have to be asking these questions. Who has the agency? If you don't have it, who does, and how could you influence them? And what kind of agency do you have? Again, as a person working in operations versus as a designer, you're going to be doing different things. As an operations person, you can start asking questions like, which tooling should we be using? What governance structures should we have? So you can start doing something different than what you might do in a role as a designer. And who has the power to grant you authority? Think about who you could partner with, or collaborate with, or work with. And by working with them, by partnering with them, it helps increase your perceived authority. And what kind of extrinsic forces can you leverage? For example, speaking at a conference in the industry. When you speak at an external conference, that helps increase your perceived authority. And I love this provocation. What are the consequences for acting as if you have all three? Once you understand what is the current state of your 3As, you can better make a call about saying, okay, well, what would happen if I pretended and acted as if I had all three? It's a more thoughtful version than the move fast and break things, because you're starting from a place of understanding what is the current state and trying to do better. And remember, perception is greater than reality here. You can, sit around and complain about your lack of authority or lack of agency, or you can come here and think, what is my current state and how can I change that current state to be able to do something about it? The next play in the playbook is to conduct a listening tour. Regardless of where you are in your journey, at any time, it's a good time to say, hey, let's stop, let's go talk to some people, do some research to understand what is our current state of things. And a great time to do a listening tour is when you've had a change in your 3As. For example, you are starting a new role and you want to be better prepared for making change within that role. Or you've just started a new project and you want to know if anybody's done a project like this before. Or you're simply building community and you want to do a better job of that. So a listening tour is what I did when I started my job as an Inclusive DesignOps Program Manager. So because of the new granted autonomy and authority from that job title, it allowed me to go set up meetings with a whole bunch of people who I would not have set up meetings with before. So this is probably a good time to do a little story break and explain how did I become an Inclusive DesignOps Program Manager at Intel. So it was about late 2018, 2019, when I first learned about both DesignOps and inclusive design. So when I heard about DesignOps, I was all, wow, career goals. This is what I want to be doing. And when I learned about inclusive design, that was more of a, oh, this is important. We all should be doing this. So one of the things I did was set up an inclusive design jam. So this was in October of 2019, inviting a bunch of designers from different teams, finding out who is already working on accessibility at the company, bringing them together, And what we did is we took the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit, pulled some of the exercises from there, and we did them together. And this was actually the time when I had my own big aha moment of, wow, I would have made a better design if I would have practiced these tools from this toolkit. So I was convinced this is the way forward. Looking at a timeline of what happened between then and now, well, in 2019, that's when I did that Inclusive Design Jam. And I'd say my design ops was at 10%. I was doing a few opsy things to help out the team I was on. In 2020, those conversations that started at the Design Jam continued. There were some projects that people started to do together there, and my design ops went to maybe 20% time. In 2021, I really wanted to push my design ops up to about 50%, really push that trajectory more onto the ops side. However, my manager said, no, we need you more at 10% ops, 90% UX design. And that was really a setback for me, that I couldn't be pushing my career where I wanted to go. In the meanwhile, I was still combining these two things together, and I did a talk at the Design Ops Summit called Inclusive Design is Design Ops to share what I was believing around this combination of these two being really important. Now, if we go back to that picture from the Inclusive Design Jam, the person who was sitting across from me at the Design Jam was Daryl Adams. And now today, Daryl Adams is my manager. We met at the Design Jam for the first time, and we started having collaboration about how do we increase inclusive design at Intel. And in 2022, Daryl Adams was increasing the size of his accessibility office team. And I use my Inclusive Design is Design Ops talk as basically a pitch to say, hey, how about we make this a full-time role? So I got the new title, Inclusive DesignOps Program Manager, and I got to achieve that 100% focus on design ops, just with a mission of helping all UX teams at Intel to adopt inclusive design. So back into the playbook, I had a new job, and the first thing I did was this listening tour. Now, the first question is, when you do a listening tour, is who should you interview? For me, that was interviewing design and research managers, people who were already doing accessibility work, people who are in UX teams of one and maybe would need more support compared to people who were in established teams. And I also talked to people from Intel's Corporate Responsibility Office and our Global Diversity, Inclusion, and Social Equity organization. And there are 5 questions I used. These were recommended from the design ops community. The first question is, what is working well? The second question is, what is not working? The third question is, what should we be doing that we aren't doing today? The fourth question is, what would you do if you were in my shoes? And the fifth question is, what should I learn about your organization that will be helpful to me in my role? So by using this simple structure of 5 questions with every person I talked to, and I believe I talked to over 50 people during my listening tour, so it was a lot of people. So by using these questions with every person consistently, I was able to pull out the insights about what are the common pain points and what are the common opportunities across all of these different people, these different groups. And one important thing that you can do when conducting your listening tour is look for those quick wins. So then you can go back and say, hey, I heard this was an opportunity. I'm going to do something about it, and see, I did it. So that way you can show those quick wins and increase your 3 A's. So not only will conducting the listening tour increase their 3 A's because you're building these relationships with people, but by doing something from your learnings, you'll also increase your 3 A's and give you that leverage to do something more later as well. Now, some of you might be listening and saying, hey, this sounds kind of like research. And it is. For me, design operations is all about designing the designer experience. So yes, you need to do research to understand what is the actual state of how things are working and not be making assumptions about how we work in order to change it. The next play in this playbook is to use a framework. And you can choose any framework that you desire. I will share with you the one that we are using. So we're using something we call the Inclusive Design Maturity Model. And this is based off of other user experience maturity models. Our model has 5 phases. The first phase is the beginning, where there's nothing, there's not even the words to discuss inclusive design, let alone practice it. The second phase is awareness. This is where people start talking about inclusive design, maybe sharing links to articles, and generally agreeing that, yeah, it's important. The next phase comes in adopting. This is when people actually start trying those methods on real projects. And something important happens when you start trying it. You start to see the gaps between how we are doing things and how we need to be doing things to fully embrace these practices. That's when you start getting into the realizing phase, when you start building out the operational support to scale those practices. Finally, the last phase of this model is the exceptional phase, where you're really doing something newsworthy. And I like to say that in this phase, this is where you don't even need to call it inclusive design anymore. It just is the way that we design. Now, we've used this framework to have a lot of different discussions. One way we've used the framework is to have different lenses into the maturity model. So we can have discussions about what do people outside of the UX community expect to see from us when we're in these different phases, or within our UX community, what do we expect to see from each other in each phase, or looking down at a project. So if you're working on a project, how might that project look different in each phase? And also as an individual on your own journey to adopting these practices, how much your practices look different in each of these phases. And I've also taken this framework and brought it to one-on-ones or to team meetings, and we'll do a sticky note exercise. So we'll take a sticky note and we'll write down there, what's an actual concrete activity or deliverable that your team does? Make it really real for them. And then we go through each of the phases and we ask questions. So in the beginning, what's the status quo? What's the impact of how you're doing things today to inclusion? And then in the beginning phase, we ask, well, what are the things that you can do to start building awareness today? Remember, you as an individual, without needing any authority from anybody else, what can you just start doing? One example that we have is people who are working with no partners and having third-party meetings. You can control the agenda. You can decide to add, hey, let's just have a agenda topic where we discuss what's the current state of accessibility or inclusion in this project. You don't need any approval to put it on the agenda. Then in the next phase, we ask, well, what can your team try to do together? What can you do differently with this activity or deliverable that, again, you don't need anybody else to give your approval to do it, but you and your team can decide to do it together. The next phase is in that realizing phase, where the shift goes from what can your team try to do on your own to where do you really need help? What do you need new organizational support in order to do something differently? And a lot of examples here are about tooling or access to things that you just can't do on your own. And the final phase is around that exceptional phase. And the prompt here is, again, what would be in a press article? What's that headline that people would be so inspired about how we're doing things that they would take notice? And my last recommendation here, once you choose your framework, and again, it doesn't have to be, this maturity model that we're using, but whatever framework you choose, make it sticky. And what I mean by that is, once you've picked a framework, don't go changing it around all the time. Keep using the same framework, because you want to scale these conversations. You're not just having this conversation with one team, you're having it with many teams or many people. And you want to be able to have that same conversation grow and scale across many people. And the best thing is when other people start using that same framework to have even more discussions beyond the ones that you are in the room for. The next play in this playbook is to make a goal, and not just any goal. Make a big, audacious goal. At Intel, our big, audacious goal is our Intel Rise 2030 goals. And one of them is all Intel UX teams will have adopted inclusive design and research practices by 2030. And I believe the technical term for these types of goals is a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And usually this goal is a pretty simple, concise statement that is easy to get people on board with. It's really one of those I believe type of statements. And it doesn't specify the execution for how you're going to reach that goal, but it does paint that vision of where you want to get to, even if it's hard, and especially if it's hard. Beyond the corporate RISE goal that I shared, I also have a personal BHAG, that we will be an industry leader in ethical, inclusive, and sustainable UX design and research practices, that it will be baked in to how we work as designers and researchers. And again, big disclaimer, this is not a corporate goal. This is my personal one. And I'm sharing it because, these should be talked about. And the only way we're going to make progress on them is by sharing them and talking about them, even if we get some skepticism in return. And the thing to remember when we are making these goals is that the goal alone does not mean progress, but it is the start of the conversation. It is a way to start making plans for progress. And I mentioned skepticism a little bit earlier, and I will admit that we did receive some skepticism when we were drafting that RISE goal, that yes, this sounds like the right thing to be doing, but I don't know how exactly we're going to reach it, how exactly we'll get there. But when you do start speaking these goals aloud, and even when you get that skepticism, now you're able to have a conversation about it. You can ask them, well, what are your concerns? What are the hurdles that we are going to face that you see so clearly? And then you can start to make a plan around it. One way to use your BHAGs in the context of, day-to-day or year-to-year planning is this thing called the mountain of tomorrow. So imagine that your big, hairy, audacious goal is that further summit, that further peak that you're trying to reach eventually. And then identify what is the summit along the way to that mountain. And you do your planning for that year, for that closer summit that you need to reach. But you know that your ultimate goal, your ultimate vision is to get to that further away mountain. So related to that mountain, the next play is about picking one thing to move your team forward. Again, we can't do everything at once to get to the ideal state immediately, but we need to do something to move forward. And the first thing you have to do as a design ops professional is to let it go. There is so much that you're not going to be able to control about how people do their design work. And you're going to need to let it go and figure out what is the one thing that you can choose to work on that will have the most impact of changing how people work. One framework here that is really helpful is a fixed, flexible, and free mindset. So fixed are the things where you do want to be very controlled in terms of this is how we're all going to do this thing in the same way. Flexible is where you say, I might give you some guidelines, but I'm not going to force anybody to do anything in one particular way. And then free is where people can decide for themselves how to do things. Maybe they're already doing great in this aspect and you just don't need to worry about it, even if it's maybe not the most ideal way they're doing something. So how can you decide what to do? Well, in addition to the listening tour, you can do more team exercises. And I'm going to take you back in time here and share one exercise I did back when I was in that 10-20% of an ops role in a UX team. So we did something I called the head, heart, hands exercise, where we just wanted to figure out where are we as a team with regard to inclusive design. So for the head, we were just trying to suss out where are we logically, rationally in terms of understanding inclusive design and being able to explain it to others. We scored pretty well there. In the heart, we were trying to figure out, are we feeling this? Are we feeling empathetic about this? And we see the vision, the why we need to do this. Most people are feeling pretty good. And then the hands, this is more about taking action. Can you actually do something? And this is where we scored pretty poorly, that, people understood it, they were feeling it, but they just didn't know what to do about it. The second part of this exercise, we did a bunch of sticky notes to figure out how might we, help ourselves or help others get to where we are at. We filled out all these stickies, we did some dot voting, and we then had to figure out, well, what is that one thing that we need to do that will help our team move forward? What we realized from there is that we needed a baseline education, but the challenge was that our team didn't have the time to do this on their own. They were so busy with their day jobs to go do this. So as the design ops person on the team, I took that information and started to build a resource for our team. I knew that we needed some bite-sized information and to gather some secondary research to get us going. So I built an inclusive card deck. So the card deck is a way that we can, focus on a little bit of information, do a lot of quick learning in these things. And also by doing that secondary research, we start to know, okay, if we need to go to research with the community people, we start to know what language to use in those recruitments for these people. And we did a short, simple exercise. So a priority sorting exercise where we shuffle the deck and we start putting them into piles of high, medium, or low relevance for a particular project. No right or wrong answers here. And then we take the cards from the high relevance pile and we do a second pass sorting to determine action, either in the more research is needed because the impact's unclear and the solution's unknown, and we really should do some primary research with people. In the middle, it's the impact's clear, solution unknown. And this is where the recommendation was to do a participatory design session with people from that community. Or in the impact clear, solution known, this is something where you're like, oh, you're right, we need to add captions. That's obvious. But the recommendation is still to do accessibility testing on those solutions that you come up with. So this is a way to help teams, go from the nebulous, there's so many possible things I could do, to pick one thing to do next in their project. Similarly, for ops, you're going to want to create your ops menu. Gather all those possible things you think you could be doing in an operations role, and then do your listening tour, do your team exercises to pick that one thing to focus on to move you forward. And track progress. This is the 7th play in the playbook. You'll want to choose metrics to help you track progress in terms of how you're doing. And my recommendation here is to keep it simple, especially for those big, audacious goals that you need to keep tracking year over year. So back to our adoption score of 21%. The way we figured this out is that we started a new State of Inclusive Design and Research Practices survey that we'll do every year to track our goals until 2030. And from that survey, we decided the calculation is the number of UX people who answered positively to at least one adoption question, or the number of people in full-time UX roles, including people who did not answer the survey. So we assume the bias here is that if you didn't answer the survey, you're probably not very well along in your adoption of inclusive design practices. And the way we decided the numerator is based off of that framework that we used. Again, adoption means trying. You don't have to be doing everything. You just have to be trying at least something to be considered adopting. And a good thing about having these metrics, having these scores, is that helps bring accountability to leadership, especially when you're not doing well. Leadership doesn't like to see when we're not doing well. So it's a great time to bring it to their attention and say, hey, we need help improving the score and to do better. And remember, no secret metrics, no matter how much imposter syndrome it causes. Finally, I'm going to want to repeat this. Just like design, operations is iterative. You're going to try out some initiatives and they're going to fail, and you're going to try something else, and you're going to keep on trying out these experiments to find what works within your company, within your teams. However, I want to address something that possibly all of us are facing, which is the setbacks along the way. And they hurt when they happen. Just when you're on a roll, you get layoffs and you lose your accessibility champions who have been so important to the work that you've been doing. Or projects get deprioritized and what you thought was going to happen is not going to happen. So when this happens, first off, check in with yourself. This change work is hard, and you shouldn't feel like it's all a burden on you, that you have to do this all by yourself. And the question we can start asking is, how do we make it hurt less? If we know that reorgs happen, and that's a common trope in the design ops community, that reorgs happen constantly, how do we prepare for that? If we know that people leave companies, if we know that perhaps you will leave a company someday, how will we feel confident that the company is going to keep moving forward in this accessibility and inclusive design work? One way to think about this is, what's the business continuity plan for inclusive design? The way that business continuity is described is the capability of an organization to continue the delivery of products or services at predefined acceptable levels following a disruptive incident. So how might we do this? For me, part of this has been creating a lot of artifacts. Anytime that I give a recommendation to somebody or point something out, I try to turn that into something that could be shared again, over and over again, so other people can pick it up and run with it. And to share a quote from the responsibility office at Intel, in the face of deprioritization, the priority is don't backslide. It's okay to make a goal to maintain the status quo when we are in a situation where we are facing setbacks. And it's okay because we know what our big, hairy, audacious goals are. And just because we're having a temporary setback or a temporary deprioritization, it doesn't change what our ultimate goal is. We're going to pick back up and keep on moving towards that after we get through this temporary setback. So we'll add that in as an 8th play to this playbook. Now, as you look at this, you might notice that I didn't give any advice for how your design team should be practicing more accessibility or should be practicing more inclusive design. And hopefully you got a lot of that from the other AxCon talks yesterday and today. And honestly, I'm not talking about those things because I am not an accessibility expert. I am an accessibility cheerleader. I want all designers and researchers to learn about accessibility and start practicing inclusion. I want there to be more accessible user experience specialists who know way more than me on this topic. And I want every person to be asking, who might we be excluding? And start having more intentional discussions in teams about who that might be, how we can do better to include them in our projects and in the makeup of our teams. For me, this shift has been from thinking about myself as an individual to thinking about systems. So no longer worrying about just my own acts as an individual designer, but thinking about how do we create that support, how to create those structures, how to change those systems of how we work together and how do we all become better at the skill of inclusive design. So is this you? Does this sound like work that you want to be doing? Well, if it does, I highly encourage finding a mentor who will help you start this career shift into design operations. And there are really great communities out there, from the Design Ops Assembly to the Roosevelt Design Ops community, who can help you figure it out to go forward. So my key takeaways from this talk: first off, it's not about you as an individual designer or researcher. It's about the organizations and the environments. And number 2, you have more agency than you think. You can start doing things within the scope of the work that you have right now. And change is not linear. We're going to have setbacks along the way, but that's okay because we know where we're going. Thank you.
All right, Saara, thank you. Okay, we can move now. Great timing. We can have a nice extended Q&A session. Personally, let me just say, what a wonderful message for me personally. I don't think I'm alone in that. I think the chat showed people were really engaged as well. This is very meaningful stuff. I think, kind of not only the way you've packaged it, but the appeal you're making.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, just very relevant, I think, for a lot of us. So with that, let me just share some of the questions and get your ideas. Okay, one right away, a concern was posted. Okay, you're asking folks to adopt a new way of thinking, take on agency, authority. What's your third A?
Agency, authority, and autonomy.
Autonomy, yeah. So he says, but it just feels like it's stacking on top of current responsibilities.
So I would disagree that it's stacking on top of existing responsibilities. It's something that you already have. And just asking you to take a moment to examine what is your current state of these things. And if you feel like you're lacking in one of those areas, to then make a plan for how you can increase your agency or your authority or your autonomy. Or you can look at those and say, hey, I'm feeling pretty good with where I am at, and I don't need to make any changes to where I am at. But everyone has their current state. You just may not have thought about it before.
Great. Yeah, doing some internal work and then taking it to the teams and around you. Great. Okay. Here's a question. Do you work closely with developers or DevOps as part of your role? And how does that relationship support your own goals?
So in my current role, I don't work closely with developers right now in this current role. So my focus is on the UX teams and helping them, increase in their skills. However, there is a broader goal around increasing that relationship as the Intel Accessibility Office to do more there as we kind of expand our goals as well.
Do you have, this is my own follow-up, do you have mentors you're finding who had kind of, in my experience, DevOps it's been around a little bit longer?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, are you able to gain some wisdom in that realm?
Not in the more recently, no, but there are some other projects that are going on where they're, you could say, more DevOps driven, and we are trying to insert the accessibility pieces into there, but it's not my primary focus.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go into the next question. Can you give any tips on how to conduct and facilitate an inclusive design jam workshop? And secondly, are there any resources out there you can point them to?
All right, so I'm sure there are lots of things you can find if you look it up. And again, those design ops communities, I highly recommend posting these types of questions in those design ops communities. For the inclusive design jam that I held, one of the main principles that I had for that was to bring in people who will share their lived experience. So again, we don't want to be making assumptions. And since we weren't, sharing any primary research during that session, it was important to just find people who could share their own personal lived experience as part of that session to kind of ground us in that reality. Again, making no assumptions. And then, yeah, I do highly recommend that Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit. So you can go find it from their website, download its exercises, and pick a few from there to just try out and see what happens.
Thank you. And that link, of course, was shared in chat at the minute it came up. So people are good that way. All right. Next one looks like for your application of the Inclusive Design Toolkit, did you have people with lived experience of disability as part of the session?
Yes, we did. Yeah, I think I just mentioned that. So yeah, we did have people with lived experience sharing their experience before we dived into the examples. Yeah.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's see. Can you share your inclusivity card deck in any way?
I am working on that. It is not yet publicly available, but it is something I'm working on getting published, hopefully this year, so we can share it out with more people.
Nice. Great. Okay, following up on your, you talked about the sticky note exercise we could do. You said one-on-one or with teams.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, no secret, you said no secret metrics. So that stood out to me. Kind of goes with the question. Do you share, you showed it in your slide, the questions to ask step by step. It looked like it mapped onto the maturity stages. Mm-hmm. Do you then share that like level with those individuals or teams that you found they fell into?
So usually I'll first present them with that maturity model so they have, the idea of where we're at. And then I'll share with them some examples from other teams in terms of, here's some ways that it can translate to other specific deliverables that other people do. And then, I generally collect a lot of those. So now I have, a much bigger set of examples that each time I do the exercise, I get more examples of what can this mean in each stage in the maturity model. Yeah.
Nice. So yeah, so they're hearing about it before the questions, and so therefore they can align them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. So could you elaborate a little bit more on that no secret metrics? I had not heard that phrase, but it's like, makes me think, what giving visibility to things is, it can incentivize certain people and others maybe demotivated and mm-hmm. with the metrics. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the other term that's often used is just transparency. So, making very transparent about your metrics, especially when they are, more difficult topics. So instead of saying, hey, we're not going to talk about this really, out loud until we have good metrics, that's kind of the opposite of what you want to do. Because when you're maybe not doing as well as you want to be, that's when you need to be asking for more help. So, share those metrics when you do need more help rather than only when things are going well. And then you'll be more likely to get that help that you need.
Nice. Yeah. Nice. Thank you. One person just said, can you talk about, or did you talk about champions networks? Does that have any?
So we are working on that right now with something we actually do want to hopefully launch this year to do a more official accessibility champions program. So something we're working on. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, folks, we have a few more minutes if you want to include. Okay, we have a new queue question, so let me check that out. Yeah, feel free to continue to add questions. Okay. A lot of comments for you, Saara. Great insights. Thank you. A really inspirational session. Love the playbook, team exercises you shared. Exactly what I needed to hear today was one comment. I love the structure of your presentation, and on and on. So any other thoughts before? Would you like to leave any, since we do have a few minutes, take advantage to ask you, Saara, if you have any final thoughts to leave the group with?
So it is hard work. I will say that. It is something where you're going to be, gathering a lot of information from a lot of people, and you're going to be figuring out what is the best way to move, an organization forward, which maybe not everyone is going to have the exact same needs. So it's going to be hard when, you're going to hear clear needs from different people, and you have to decide what is the more important need to, prioritize first. We're in a particularly interesting company where we have UX teams working on radically different types of UX work. So support that works for one team doesn't necessarily work for another team. So making those hard calls about what to focus on first is probably the hardest decision making you'll have to make in this type of role. That, and like I said, it's experimentation. It's iterative. You're going to try something, see if it works or not, and then adjust. If that initiative that you thought was going to be amazing ends up not being amazing, be ready to say, okay, we're going to stop investing time and energy into that initiative, and we're going to try something else when, maybe it didn't work out as well as you thought it would.
Nice. Yeah. Saara, forgive me. I made it sound like that was the end. But we have 60 seconds, and there's a nice question came in. One more?
All right.
Okay. Do you have advice for transitioning from a design role to a design ops role?
Yes. So first off, join the communities, the Design Ops Assembly, the Rosenfeld Design Ops community. There are a lot of people there who are in the exact same position who are wanting to do this. And what you want to do is really have a conversation with your manager. As a designer, you probably already know what are some of the sticking points within your team of things that need to be changed or need to be fixed. So bring that to your manager and say, hey, I want to, work on this or fix this or change this, and come up with a plan to, kind of more officially say, okay, yeah, that's a, project that you can take on to help, improve the efficiency of our team. And then, have that be that first quick win to show that you can do this. And then from there, choose that next thing and say, hey, let's do something more and something more. And again, the design ops communities are amazing. They will provide you, all the support to say, hey, here's how you could approach that, whatever it is you choose to try to do first.
Okay, so for all of those of you who want to make a difference, you've got a playbook.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Saara, again, and thanks to the community. You have one more session, one more hour coming up here in XCon. Enjoy.